Okay, so let's start the computer build. Here is the case I'll be using. This is a rack mount case. Let's take a look at the front here. And it's a standard 19-inch wide, so standard rack mount, and 2-inch in height, 2-unit in height, I should say. And we've got the rack ears here and here. These are removable if you wanted to, but I'm going to rack mount this, so they'll screw into the rack mount. We've got 2 USB ports, a power switch, reset switch, and power and hard drive LEDs. On the back, we have our opening here for our I/O plate for the motherboard, ports, and here we have 4 slot covers for PCI Express cards. And here's the opening for the power supply, which you'll notice the screw holes are keyed in such a way so a power supply can only be installed in one direction. Okay, and we have some airflow for that power supply here and here, and of course in the back. All right, so let's take the case cover off. It comes with 4 screws. I've already removed those, so we'll take the case cover off now. Now, if we look inside the case here, it's pretty straightforward. This is designed for micro ATX boards and other boards. I'm going to use it with micro ATX. And we've got several things here. First of all, we have our case connectors. And we have 3 bays here for 3.5-inch drives. Each of those has a fan in front. And those fans connect with these Molex connectors, otherwise known as peripheral connectors. And that's about it. That is the case. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this build into a couple pieces. First, we're going to work with the case. We're going to install the power supply, the plate. Actually, we'll do the plate first, then the power supply, and then the hard drives. Got to decide which bay to put those in. Then we'll do the motherboard separately with the CPU and RAM, and then install that into the case. So first thing is the I/O plate, and that's going to go in here, and that's going to allow the ports of the motherboard to come through. Now, if we take a look at the plate and we take a look at the motherboard, trying to keep it in the bag for now, you'll see that we have a couple extra ports, RJ45, USB. We got a second RJ45 here, a third one actually. So we're going to have to remove some of these plates. And some people like to do that first. You can also do it after you install this. That's why I like to install these first, just in case you have to kind of work with these a little bit. So we're going to snap this into place and see if it fits. And that's snapped in really nicely. Sometimes you have to kind of tap these in with a mallet, but this snapped in really nicely, so that was a good fit. And we'll just pry out those additional portions of the plate for those ports that we need. And we could do that with a flathead screwdriver or whatever tool you really want to use. And we'll just kind of pry those out. So push on those. And then we could just gently work them back and forth until they are released. Okay, next on the list is the power supply. So we've got that here. And usually I go with the cheaper stuff that I can find for my own builds. And so one of the things I might do different for a customer is go with something modular. So we only have to use the cables that we need and then save all the space in the case so we don't have to have all these bundled up. So that's one of the differences I'd make with that, one of the changes I'd make to that. But we're going to insert this now, and that's just going to go into place here. Line it up with the screw holes, and it fits very flush and flat here. Some people like to do little standoffs for their power supplies, but that really shouldn't be necessary here. We've got our 4 screws, and we'll screw this guy in. Sometimes I'll use a bigger screwdriver, bigger Phillips head to get these in there. You have to kind of drive these in to get them into this correctly. Okay, and like I was saying, these are set up in such a way so you really can't install the power supply the wrong direction because you have this screw here. All right, and we've got our kill switch and our power connection and our 4 screws, and fits in nicely. Now, usually I'll test the power supply before I put it in. So we have a known good power supply here, though, and I'll use a power supply tester for that to check it. So actually plug in the power supply, flick it on, connect all the ports, and then turn the power supply on. Connect the 24-pin and the 8-pin CPU, 8-pin PCIe, or 6-pin and Molex, and just check those, see if they work. I show how to use this in another video, but always check the power supply before I actually install it. Now, with these types of cases, you don't have nearly as much space as, say, in a tower case, so you really want to plan out where things are going to go in advance. And so here's the motherboard, and we'll just kind of place that in here. That's basically where it's going to go. And so the CPU is going to go here, and the heatsink is going to stand up pretty high. And that is mostly going to be in line with this bay. So I'll probably leave this bay open to get as much airflow through there as possible. Generally, what I'll do is I use this bay here, which is in line with the power supply, for the hard drives. And in fact, they give you two connections for this. And you really can't have that here because the motherboard's going to be underneath. So I'll probably put the drives here. Sometimes I'd put maybe an extra drive in this one, just to keep things away from that airflow of the CPU. If you had a powerful video card, you'd want to think about that too. It would have to be half height, and you're really not going to be able to do that too well with a case like this because it's only a 2-unit. You'd have to go with a 3-unit or bigger. So you'd have that height for that video card. But I'm mainly interested in the CPU. And so we'll probably put the hard drives in this chassis. And maybe I might be adding a 3rd drive, so that might go here at some point. But keeping that airflow with these 2 chassis, keeping these open and having the airflow there might really help out. So just kind of planning it out a little bit. And so next thing we're going to do, we'll take this chassis out so we can put the hard drives into it. And that's just screwed down with 4 screws. And lift this out. And you can see here, we can put in the hard drives here. So I'm going to put my 3.5-inch drive, which I'm salvaging from another computer, and also the main 2.5-inch drive in here. So we'll do that next. Okay, so we have our chassis for the hard drives, the frame here, and I've got one of the drives I'm going to use. This is a magnetic drive, 1 terabyte. If this computer was for a customer, I'd probably go with a little bit more expensive case. Had to keep it under budget, so had to do what I had to do. But a couple things, for example, this frame doesn't come with any type of grommets. And I like to have the grommets for magnetic drives so it can reduce vibrations and improve the lifespan of the drive. So I actually salvaged some of the grommets from the system that this was in. And so we'll just kind of force those in here. I'm going to put this drive on the top. And so we've got these grommets. I'm just going to kind of force these in here so that we can use them, trying not to rip them up. I actually ran out of these in my kit. All right, so now you have the grommet. It's a soft rubber grommet that'll help to reduce vibrations on both sides between the screw. And it also helps to kind of compress when you screw in the drive, so it doesn't make the drive expand too much. So we'll put the rest of those in. Okay, so we have the 4 grommets in there now. So that'll help to reduce vibrations a little bit. Going to spread this guy open a little so that we can get that drive in there. And again, this is a 1 terabyte magnetic drive, and this was part of a RAID 1 array in another server. So I kind of salvaged this I'm going to use the other drive in one of my other systems and salvage the grommets and the actual screws for it. So let's get this guy in there. Sometimes you have to work this a little bit. And we'll start getting those screws in there. There we go. These screws are designed for use with these grommets. And get that last screw in there. All right, first drive is complete. And now we'll put the second drive in. Now here we have a mounting bracket for a 2.5-inch drive that I've gotten. So we'll put that together next and put that into this frame and then get it all in the computer. Okay, so here we have our 2.5-inch SSD, our SATA 3.0, does 6 gigabits per second. This is where the operating system is going to go. And there's no 2.5-inch bays in this case, so I'm using an adapter from 2.5 to 3.5 to install this. So we're going to put this in on the bottom here. We'll slide this in, and we'll put the screws in for that. They attach right here and here on 4 screws all together. So we'll do that now. And put that last screw in there. Okay, make sure those are in good. Again, not too tight. We don't want to bend the frame of the hard drive at all. Okay, so we have that in there. And now this is oriented in such a way where it'll have the maximum distance between this drive and this drive, so we can maximize the airflow. I could always put this drive in a different bay, but I think we'll be okay here. Keep them both in the same bay. And the SATA ports are lined up also. So now we'll screw this 3.5-inch tray into this frame. And screw this last one in. Okay, so again, we don't want to go too hard on this. The frame can bend, but we don't want to go too hard so that it'll pull apart the frame of the magnetic drive. So we're going to kind of adjust this a little bit, adjust all the screws so that it's tight, but not overly so. There we go. So there's our hard drive bay. And now we can put this into the case. Okay, so we have our case back here. And now you may say, well, Dave, why didn't you install hard drives here? This is going to be really tight. And it is going to be tight. But I'm prepared for that. I'm going to plug everything in first before I put in the actual frame. I really just want that airflow. As much airflow between these fans and out to the motherboard and the RAM and especially the CPU as I can possibly get. So I'm willing to sacrifice that. If it doesn't work, we could always change it out. But we should be pretty good. So I have some SATA cables here, and we'll connect the SATA, and always note the keyed position for those. So we'll plug those in. Okay, and then we'll locate SATA power. That's our 15-pin power here. And we'll go with the last 2. We'll use the last 2 there. And this should work out nicely the way they're keyed. So we'll plug one into this drive. That's where it's going to get a little tricky because this sticks out. So I'm actually going to pull this back out and just bend it a little bit. So now we have our cables connected, and then we'll put the frame in afterwards. And it is very tight, but it does fit. So it's going to allow for that airflow that I really want And now we can screw in these original 4 screws for the frame into the case. Okay, and screw in that last one. Make sure they're all tight, so the frame is tight with the case. And we are good. We've got our SATA connections, we've got our power connections. Okay, and so we have our legacy connectors here. We've got one more SATA, we've got Molex, 2 of those, and a Berg connector for a floppy drive, just in case you ever had one of those. And so we want to connect up the fans. So we'll do that now. And these fans, I believe, can be daisy chained. We can connect one to the other. So we'll connect these 2 together. Okay. And so we're going to use both of these to connect those up. Okay, so I connected up those Molex connectors. And so we've got the 3 fans connected and just kind of wired it underneath here. And put some of those wires in here for now. There's going to be lots of cable management later. It's going to be tight in here, but we'll see how it goes. And I want to make sure everything is away from the fans underneath. So we'll be doing a lot of rerouting of wires once we make sure everything works. So we've got that stuff installed. Now the next step is going to be to work with the motherboard and the RAM and CPU. So we'll take the case out for now, and we'll build out the guts of the computer. Okay, so I've taken the motherboard out of the anti-static bag, and I have that ready. I have the RAM ready. I have the CPU and the heatsink all prepared, ready to go. So we'll start with the RAM. And again, you could do this inside the case if you wish. As long as you have your electrostatic discharge protection going. And so everything we have here is on an anti-static mat, grounded, and I'm connected to that as well. All right, so make sure that you're protecting your equipment and yourself when you're working on computers. But again, this could be done in the case or here. It's a little bit easier to do it just on, do the CPU and RAM here and then place the entire motherboard into the case. We get a little bit more of a sturdy connection here. So we're going to start with the RAM, and here are our RAM slots. We have 4. We're only using 2 sticks, and effectively we're going to use the blue slots. But you always want to check your motherboard documentation. Now, if you're using 2, then you want to use DIMM A2 and B2. They're also labeled. Those are the blue slots, DIMM A2 and DIMM B2. They're also labeled on the motherboard, but of course color-coded. So we're going to put those in now. And so this is DDR4, and so we're going to open the slots here. Okay, and we'll take our first stick of RAM. Always very careful to grab these by the edges. And then you have to orient and make sure that the notch is going to be placed in the correct location. So we do that. We'll go straight down into the slot and then press straight down on both edges with even pressure until it snaps into place. So that took a little bit more force than usual with this particular motherboard, but that ensures a tight fit. So we'll do the same thing here with the other stick and put that one in. Again, even pressure if at all possible until it snaps into place. Took a little more pressure than some other motherboards that I work with. So we just want to double check. Okay, we got the blue slots and the ears are all fully closed, those locking tabs. And just to verify, DIMM A2 and DIMM B2, and it shows you on the bottom there towards the edge of the motherboard, and to the top it says towards the CPU. So you know you're orienting it properly towards the bottom of the motherboard, the edge of the motherboard, and towards the CPU here. So that's it. I mean, building these systems really isn't that hard. It's really just a matter of patience and just being careful not to damage any components. So now we'll move on to the CPU, and there's usually a plastic cap that you have to remove. So we'll get rid of that. Okay, put that aside. If for some reason the motherboard didn't work, we would put this back on before returning it. We'll unlock the ARM here. You want to be careful to not touch the motherboard if at all possible. So we're going to press down and let that go. Didn't touch the board, so that's good. Open this up. And this is where our CPU is going to go. So this is an LGA 1151, which can allow for various CPUs. We're using a Xeon. And so here is our Xeon CPU. And you always want to make sure it's the right one. And this one says it's an E3 1240 V6. So that's what we want. Then you want to identify where pin 1 is. Pin 1, usually when you open the cover here and unlock it, it'll be to your bottom left. But you're looking for a little triangle. There's a little triangle here. Zoom in a little bit. There's a little triangle right here. That is pin 1. And so we want to orient the little triangle here that we see for the CPU. So let's go ahead and install this one. We'll open that up. And this is just going to get placed directly in. Let go of it a little bit there. That's okay. And looks good. Then we can close the case and lock it down. Very careful not to touch the board. And we're good. That's it. We put it in. Now, of course, you really want to check these types of things. You want to check and make sure that your CPU is installed flat. So we can see it is flush within the socket. But just want to make sure. It's really hard it's really hard to make a mistake with these nowadays. So we can see here we are good. And we'll lock it into place. All right. Now, in the build that we did for the AV editor computer, we had to apply thermal compound here because we were using a custom heatsink. And so generally when you do that, you'd apply that in a vertical bead for Intel chips, but it could be a horizontal bead. It doesn't really make a difference as long as you have it evenly spread. But this CPU comes with a heatsink, and this has thermal compound pre-applied, making our job so much easier. I mean, honestly, if I wasn't recording this build would take probably 10 to 15 minutes. You know, a lot of times they'll design it in such a way where the writing on the CPU should match with the writing on the heatsink. And I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to unroute this altogether and plug it in this way. And the main reason for that is because the thermal compound is going in this direction. And I want it to go vertically because that's generally how I'll do that with Intel CPUs. So I don't really want this to be like this or like this. Going to connect it like this. Okay, but we want to be very sure before we do it because once it's on, that thermal compound is then going to compress against the CPU cap. So we want to be real careful with that and make sure we know exactly what we're doing beforehand. Now, these have these little plastic screws which will go into these 4 holes here. And we just press those down straight and then tighten them. So let's plug this guy in now. Okay, very carefully. All right, that's what we want. Get a flathead out. Press down. There we go. And press down. And press down. And down. Okay, those 4 are locked. Now in some cases you have to actually tighten these, but with this we don't have to. If we wanted to unlock this, we would turn each of these counterclockwise 90 degrees and then pull it straight out. But these, once you plug them in, for this particular heatsink, it should stay. And you can always check the documentation for your particular CPU. Just want to make sure it's connected tight. And then we'll take a look at the actual heatsink in there and make sure we have a good connection. Make sure it's nice and flush in there so that the thermal compound will spread out. And I'm looking at it now. It does look good. We should be in good shape. And this is a pretty low profile heatsink and fan assembly, so it's fine for our case. Okay, so we have our case back here, and we have our open space ready for the motherboard. This already comes with standoffs, but sometimes you have to screw in some brass standoffs into the case. This already has them. Now, you may say, Dave, what do you do with the motherboard when you're done working with it? Well, you want to try to make sure that you're keeping those electrical potentials equal between yourself, the case, the board. So you have a couple options. One, you can have a second anti-static mat connected to your grounding structure. Or two, you can put the board inside of an anti-static bag until you're ready for it. And that's what you do with components until you're ready to work with them. Okay, so we'll take this board, holding by the edges, oriented properly, and we'll place it in here carefully, carefully. And place that down. Fits in there nice. And we'll get it so the ports go through the I/O plate. And we want to make sure that the screw holes are lined up. And you can see them here. Okay, so now we need to screw in the motherboard into those standoffs. And generally you have about 6 or 7 screws that you have to put in. Different screws for different boards. But this is what we're going to use here. We'll place this in there with our parts grabber. And screw that in. And get it right on center. Good. And we'll do that with the rest of the screws. Okay, 1 screw left to go, and it's actually under here. We have a nice hole in this drive tray, this frame, so we can screw that down. Good. And to get to this corner one here, had to take out another one of these frames. It was actually in the way. There was no way to do it. Okay, so the motherboard's all screwed in. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 screws all together, and looks nice and solid. This is not going anywhere. Looks very flush, very flat, and the ports are coming out through the I/O plate very nicely. Show that. The ports are coming out here very nicely. All right. So looking good so far. Now we'll work on our adapter card solutions, and we'll start with the M.2 solution. I wanted a full PCI Express by 4 connection, and so I got this card to facilitate that, and we're going to use this M.2 drive. But this is a full height slot cover, and we need half height for this particular case because it's only a 2-unit case. If it's a 3-unit, we could use this, but we're going to remove that, just 2 screws here, and we'll put the new one on. And as usual, trying hard not to touch any of the circuitry or the slot itself. Okay, tighten those up good. Looks good. Now, to install an M.2 card, and I've shown this in other videos, you need to select the right size card. This is an M.2 2280 drive, so you have to select the right place to connect it. So we'll have to attach a screw and washer here at the 2280 location. So we have an accepting screw and a washer, and then the actual screw for the M.2 drive. So we'll put that together now. Hand tightening is usually enough, but you can use a needle nose pliers to make that tighter if you need to. Then we can install the drive. And it's funny, this little drive is 1 terabyte, and it can do about 3,500 megabytes per second read. And the most expensive single item in the computer. So M.2 drive, NVMe, and utilizes PCI Express by 4. So we're going to put this into the slot on this card at a slight angle. Make sure that the notch matches up. And get that in all the way, and then press it down, and we'll attach it with the screw. Yeah, this is a fairly small Phillips head, so we need a smaller size Phillips head screw here at number 0. Always got to have that in your kit. And that'll go into the accepting screw that we just connected before. Screw that down. And there you have it. So here we have that screw, and here's the connection for the M.2 drive. And it looks good. It's got a tiny bit of space between it and the card. Don't really want it touching, so I might actually loosen this a tiny bit just to pull it away from the board a little bit. And so this is going to go into a PCI Express by 4 slot. So that one's done. Put that to the side. Now we can work on our video card. Okay, once again, very basic video card. It's PCI Express by 16, but very basic card, just using this for video. So again, this has multiple video ports. I'm not going to need to use the VGA. I will be using HDMI. So we're going to have to change out the slot cover for that. And we have 2 slot covers here. This one's for the VGA if you want to use that, and this one's for HDMI and DVI. So we'll take those caps off, exposing those ports, full-size HDMI, DVI, and our VGA. Yes, VGA. Okay, so we need to remove this guy. Okay, so we'll unscrew these, and if you need to, use a set of needle nose pliers or whatever pliers or wrench you have handy, or a socket set. And we're going to have to disconnect this as well, because we will not be using VGA. And there we go. And then we'll hold on to that. That'll stay in the motherboard box. And we'll apply this new slot cover on here. Okay, so I tighten those down. Now we have our half-height slot cover. We can use DVI or HDMI, and I'll be using HDMI for this guy. And so that card's ready. So now we have both of our cards. This one's going to go in a by 16 slot. This one's going to go in a by 4, and we can put those into our case. Okay, so now we can select the slots that we're going to use for the cards. We have to use the PCI Express 16, the by 16 slot for the video card. That's the longer one. And that kind of excludes usage of this. And so the other card with the M.2, we'll put that as far away from the video card as we can, because that has a fan that's going to be on this side. So we'll use this slot here. And we'll remove these 2 slot covers. Sometimes you have to undo the other slots around it, the other slot covers around it, in order to get the slot cover out, because it holds it down a little bit. There we go. So we got these 2 open, and we can put in the cards. Now, we'll start with the video card. Actually, we'll start with the video card. And keep this in an anti-static bag until I'm ready to use it. Okay, and here's our card. Once again, I just capped the DVI because I'm not going to use that. And we're just going to use the HDMI. And we'll take the slot cover off, the connector cover. All right, and place it in here carefully. Okay, so this one needs to kind of be adjusted a little bit so that it'll go in. And the lip of the case kind of covers it up a little bit, so we have to actually wiggle it a tiny bit to get it in there. And it snaps into place. Make sure we get that all the way down. Then we check if it's standing straight up. Okay. And when it snaps into place, you get that white locking tab that'll hold that in. Screw that down with one of the screws we took out previously with the slot cover. And now we can tighten down this slot cover. There we go. Now we have video. This does not require any type of PCI Express power. It's a low-end card just for basic video. All right, we'll take our other card. Going to be super careful with this because it has our M.2 drive. Take it out of the anti-statics bag. And so we'll put this into a by-4 slot here. I'm going to have to click that into place. Okay, and once we get it past the edge of the case there, in between that and the motherboard, then we can press straight down with both thumbs, even pressure, and snap it in. Nice. Screw that guy in. Check this one. Screw that in. Make sure everything is nice and tight. Not too tight, not overly tight. And make sure the slot covers are flush with the back of the case so that we have the proper airflow. And so that is our M.2 configuration here and our video card. Now it's time to cable everything up because we have everything connected as far as the hardware goes. Now I got to deal with the cables, and we're going to have to do lots of cable management. So I've run the main power through here. This is, again, micro ATX, and this is ATX 2.X. This is, I believe, a 2.3 connector. It's a 24-pin, and so that's going to connect to the main motherboard power. And we'll guide that in. And this is one of the reasons sometimes why you might want to do RAM and CPU while the motherboard is in the case. But we can work around that a little bit, and we'll snap that into place. Okay, that clicks into place. We also need to put in the 8-pin CPU power, which goes over here. Snap that in. And again, I'm going to do plenty of cable management once this is all done. Okay, we'll connect our SATA drives. And we have lots of SATA ports here. We've got ports 0 and 1, which is what I'm going to use. And then lots of additional SATA ports. But I'm going to use those orange ones. This one here is the operating system drive. So that's going to go into the 0 port. Plug that straight in. And this one here is for the backup drive, the 1 terabyte magnetic drive. So we'll plug that into port 1. And they're labeled on the board. It's also in the documentation for the motherboard manual. Now I plugged in the main power. Sometimes you might do that last. Not a big deal because this is unplugged and the kill switch is off. So not really a big deal either way. But sometimes I'll do that last. In fact, quite often I'll do that last. But just trying to get it out of the way because of the space concerns here. Okay, now we can connect the case connectors, the wires from the front panel of the case to the header here. And of course, you got to check the documentation for this. And we have several of these. Here we have the power switch and the reset switch. Those are 2-pin connectors, and those are going to go here on the first set of pins and the second set of pins. Connect those now. Okay, so we've got those two. And over here we have some more. The power LED goes right after the gap that's there, and the HDD LED is right after that. Okay, so we'll connect those two now. That's our power LED. And directly after that one is the hard drive LED. Okay, so we got some connectivity there. And that's what I want for now. I'll connect the USB later once we see that this computer can boot properly. And we'll clean up all the cables and everything. But that in a nutshell is the connections. And so we can look over everything once again. We've got our motherboard, our CPU, RAM, video card, M.2 card. We've got the main power. We've got the CPU power. We've got SATA, and we put power to those drives as well before. And we've got some of the header connections. So at this point, we're going to boot it up and see how it does. Okay, so moment of truth here. We've got everything connected up. And so we'll connect our IEC cable to the power supply. And we'll turn on the kill switch, the on-off switch for the power supply. And when we do so, we got the light here. That's telling us that we're getting power to the motherboard. And I'm going to press the power switch on the front. And it looks good. Power supply fan has started. CPU fan has started. And all 3 fans are spinning. Now what I did here was I daisy chained this fan to this one and used one of the Molex power connectors. And on this fan I used a separate Molex connector. And it's fairly quiet. So looks good. It is running and all fans are on. Lights are on. Looks good to me. So now the next test will be to work in the BIOS and see if all the components are being seen properly. All right. So that is our system build. Let's shut it down. I'm going to hit the kill switch and unplug it. Okay. And we'll take a look at the ports on the back here real quick. Okay, so we have our IEC power connection and our kill switch for the power supply. Over here we have the video. We've got DVI. And we've got HDMI. These are link lights for the M.2 card, but that's going to have to get set up within the firmware first, within the BIOS. And then from left to right on the motherboard, we have a communications port. That's a COM port. That's a DE9, also known as a DB9. So that's nice. We can communicate with various devices if necessary, or communicate with this computer via this. Then we have an RJ45 port here. That's for the administration interface. And that's effectively going to be used in a headless manner with IPMI and, work with the system through a browser. Then we have USB 2.0 ports, USB 3.0, which I will use to do the installation of the OS, and 2 more RJ45s. This is for data. So these are we're going to connect to our switch and do link aggregation between these to double the bandwidth. And then here we have an SVGA video, which is built into the board. And that's another reason that we didn't really need that on the video card. We just took that off and disconnected it. So there's the ports. Everything looks good. Okay, so I ran a couple more tests and everything seems to be running good. So I started doing a little bit of cable management just to clean it up a little bit here and keep everything kind of stable. I'm going to case this up and start getting into the BIOS, the UEFI BIOS, and start modifying the firmware, make sure it sees all the components and get everything set up properly and readied for the operating system install. So that is about it for this build. The virtualization server is built, and that's the end of this lesson.